Jackson. Hey everybody, welcome to Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you on Sunday, March 20th, 2022. I want you to call us at 1-866-594-HOPE, 1-866-594-4673. Of course, we're in the midst of this war in Ukraine, Russia, U.S., NATO. There's a lot going on. But at the same time, as we are warring for freedom and as there are debates and discussions about this all over the world, we are fighting for our rights, our voting rights, our freedoms and liberties here in the United States. It's always been a fight, and it still is today. And we're going to be talking about the Wall Street Project shortly, which we're having in New York. Been having it for more than 30 years now, looking for equity and equality on Wall Street. Wall Street should look like Main Street. So let's talk about getting our votes, getting our voting rights, everybody. I want you to call us 866-594-HOPE, 866-594-4673. I mean, the American Republic is under threat right now. There is a group called Freedom House. Now, they're an American organization. They have been operational since the Second World War, and they warn against autocracy and repression that's on the march around the world. They issued a special report on a country that had not usually warranted such attention. They had never done this before because they issued it on the United States. They noted that the United States slid down its ranking of countries by political rights and civil liberties. It is now 59th, Jeremy, 59th on the Freedom House list, slightly below Argentina and Mongolia. The report warned that the country faced an acute crisis for democracy. Wow. In November, the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, an influential Stockholm based think tank, followed suit. They agreed. They added that the United States is on its list of backsliding democracies. For the first time, that has never happened. So, what's going on, everybody? According to the Brennan Center, the efforts to restrict the vote have been on the march from 2020 to 2021 to 2022. Actually, it started way before then. It's been on the march, and we need to talk about that today. What about an executive order for our voting rights? We don't have that. We're in the 22 season. All 435 seats of the House of Representatives are up for grabs. 35 of the 100 Senate seats will be up for grabs. Who's going to come out on top? We got a lot to talk about today. So call us at 1-866-594-HOPE, 1-866-594-4673. Can you believe the United States is on the list for backsliding democracies? But you can turn it around. But you're going to have to fight to make it happen. And indeed, you have to keep hope alive. I'm Santita Jackson. Stay right here with more of Keep Hope Alive in just a few minutes. Your opinion counts. 1-866. Okay, we got Reverend. Yep. Wonderful. That's 1-866-594. Hey, how are you? Well, you know what? I'm going to keep you just for a couple minutes because I want you to get your rest because I know you've got a full day. But I want you to say hello to Frank Watkins and John Nichols. We've got Attorney Griggs here, as you requested. You wanted John Nichols, Attorney Griggs, and Robert Patillo, so they're all here, and Frank Watkins always flanking here.
Good morning, brother. Good morning, Reverend Jack. Good morning, Reverend.
Can you get Reverend Uri up? Oh, okay.
What's going on? Dave Daly.
Okay, great. Because Reverend, I'm going to get Reverend Uri to give us, like a 2 or 3 minute snapshot of the Wall Street Project. You can just go right into the importance of the vote and go, okay?
Okay, Santita.
Okay, very good.
What's going on?
I'm sorry?
Hey, good morning, Dave Daly.
I'll say what's going on.
Okay.
Hold on, please press it.
There you go.
Dave Daly.
Oh, wow. This is fake. Milk, hot chocolate.
It's nothing worse than that.
Oh my gosh. I mean, John,
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I'm like, I'm ready for, I mean,
I have
because,
standards.
oh, I do. Well, first of all, I make mine with real milk when I deign to make
Yeah,
hot
that's a
chocolate.
requirement. Good morning.
Yeah,
Good morning, Reverend Uri. Hold on to
I
it.
should
That's
have
a
known.
requirement. It's not the only one.
This
And
is,
here's
yes, yes, yes.
as the law requires new markers initiative.
Well,
New
Reverend,
markers initiative.
I got it, but what we're going to do, Reverend Yuri is going to speak to that for about 2 to 3 minutes, okay?
Yeah.
Reverend, and then I'm going to come to you about the vote, and then I'm going to let you go.
Athletic teams have markets. I'm not sure you know it was exposed to.
Okay, well, what we want to do, Reverend, what we want to do is drive people to whatever virtual seminars we'll be having. That is what you want to do. We want to jump right into the topic at hand, okay?
On the theme and why Britain, just a minute,
You want to speak about Brittany Griner?
about the theme of why we're new markets initiative. Seems to have enormous resources, groundkeepers, security forces, cleaners, all that, so that we can do, we're not allowed to do.
Reverend?
Worse than black husband. Yes.
No. Just do what I'm asking you to do,
Okay.
okay?
Okay.
Stay right here because you sound tired. I want you to be at your best. Just get into the vote for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
All right. Okay, Robert Patillo, how are you?
I'm outstanding. How are you?
Reverend, he wants you to fly him to New York and put him up at the Ritz. And I do too. Let's.
Four seasons, you know,
I'm not mad at you.
was an option.
We used to we used to stay at this hotel. Well, just they let us stay there one time. It was such a horrible experience. It was called the Stay Hotel, and we had to do this was like I think the election 2012, and we had to do like coverage at 6 in the morning until like after midnight. And this guy, it was so funny. He said, "You know what? Let's just talk about the Don't Stay Hotel." That's how he opened up the segment. I was like, because he was like 6'5", he could barely stand in the room. I was like, this is like a nightmare.
Stand by.
Oh boy, the standby. Stand by. Okay, Reverend. Okay, so Robert Patillo, I'm sorry, Reverend Yuri. Got to go to Reverend really quickly, then I'm going to go to you about Wall Street, ask you something about it, Robert Patillo. I can hear something in the background. Have everyone quiet in the background, Reverend, please. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm Santita Jackson. Hello, Michael Ann and Carol Soskin out there on the left coast. You're almost on the left coast, Michael Ann. Shirley from beautiful Philadelphia, Kimberly King, and Max out there in D.C. Hey, hey, hey. Mark Stevens in D.C. So many of my morning stars. Bill Morton sending you much love. Jewel, Linda, and everybody, please like and share this show. Everybody, all my morning stars, like and share the show. Like and share, like and share, like and share. We're talking about our voting rights in the midst of all that's going on in Ukraine and all around the world. I've been watching a lot of international television, Reverend Jackson. I've been watching, Indian television outlets and the discussions about Ukraine in Africa, in South Africa, and just throughout the world. There are different takes on this when you go into the global South. That having been said, what people are in agreement on is that everybody needs their basic human rights, and your voting rights are part of that. Anytime the Freedom House, an American organization since the Second World War, which has warned against autocracy and repression, they are now looking at it in the United States of America. A Stockholm based think tank followed suit. They said, look, America, for the first time, is on its list of backsliding democracies. Indeed, we have Attorney Gerald Griggs from the NAACP in Atlanta who's been saying we need an executive order. He's been pushing that for voting rights. We have got, of course, David Daley, New York Times bestselling author, rat-effed and Unrigged. You need to get those two books. We're going to be hearing from him. John Nichols, of course, from The Nation magazine, their national correspondent. His latest book is Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers. Urge you to get that. Of course, Reverend Frank Watkins' book that he co-wrote with Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., A More Perfect Union Advancing New American Rights. We're going to hear from Reverend Jesse Jackson, who is in New York, before we get into all of this here at the Wall Street Conference. We're going to hear from Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, our Vice President at Rainbow Push, and Attorney Robert Patillo, Southeastern Regional Director. But Reverend Jackson, you, every week in and week out, year in and year out, push on the vote. Why? Are you surprised that these organizations are saying that America is in trouble? Because we don't have these basic rights tied down.
That's among nations. 59 among nations. Santiago, so long we had the right to vote, we could not function. Didn't have jurors speak up for justice. But now we have the right to vote. The action is put in. In the last century, we had the right to vote for the first time. 8 black congressmen in South Carolina alone, for example. But they removed the stacked the courts, increased violence, terrorism, drove us north to the urban ghettos of Chicago and Illinois, and New York and the like. What's happening is attempting to same pattern again. Instead of go to right wingers, and then I figure like Trump emerges. The difference must be our reaction. And the United States we went silent to the chambers.
Mm. Absolutely, we have to fight back. Reverend Jackson is in New York at the Wall Street Project as we get comments about the vote from everybody else. Let me start with you, Reverend Dr. Yeary. Why are we gathering in New York? We've been doing it for decades now.
Well, good morning, Sanjita. Good morning, Reverend. We have been doing it for decades. This year is a marker. The first convening of the Wall Street Project was in actually 1997. This makes it 25 years since that first official gathering to talk about access to capital opportunity on Wall Street in ways that affects Main Street. So this year, we are highlighting and marking Reverend's quarter-century contribution in the area of economic empowerment through the Wall Street Project. But part of that is focusing on the current conditions of what we see going on in professional sports. In the NFL, for example, you've got 32 teams who have in their own right, their own kind of internal economic workings that are not equitable when it comes to who has access. We've spent a lot of time talking about what's going on with Brian Flores on the sideline, but we're not talking about what's going on in the boardroom of the teams. What are we looking at in terms of professional services, diversity and equity? Who is actually in the front office, not just who's on the coaching staff? And so we're beginning to look at not only what we've done over 25 years in the midst of this conflict that's going on globally. There's this inner simmering that has gone unnoticed and unattended to that Reverend has been highlighting for 25 years. And so on Monday, we will be in person, happening convenings around the connections between faith and labor leaders in driving the interest of economic empowerment, particularly some of that's going to be tied to voter turnout and voter engagement. There will be a business luncheon where we will hear from the mayor of New York and others talking about what's going on within the current business climate, not just in New York, but how New York affects what happens in the rest of the world. And then at 4 o'clock on Monday, Reverend Jackson will be ringing the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And what a tremendous honor it is to recognize that the exchange of today is not the exchange that it was 25 years ago. And that is largely to the efforts of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr. There'll be a reception where we engage in serious conversation, not just toast 25 years, but plan the next 25 years of how we're going to impact the world through Wall Street. New Markets Initiatives will be part of that conversation, but also who has access to the transactions that actually empower many white firms to the exclusion of minority firms. to make sure that we have a seat at the table and the playing field is indeed level and fair. On Tuesday, everything is going to be virtual, so you don't have to be physically in New York to participate in the conversations. We'll talk about empowerment in sports. We'll talk about what's going on with diversity in many of these new markets areas. We're going to talk about access to capital and the whole gamut. For more information, all you got to do is go to rainbowpush.org. You can sign up and register there to be a part of the virtual gathering. But keep an eye on what's going on in New York on Monday, because I believe Reverend Jackson is going to lay out the agenda for not just what we've done over the past 25 years, but what we need to be ready to do for the next 25 years.
Amen to that. So let's take this shift over to our voting rights. You know, Attorney Gerald Griggs from the NAACP in Atlanta, you have been calling for an executive order to be issued by the president on our voting rights immediately. And then you hear the Freedom House is saying that America has slid down in its ranking of countries by political rights and civil liberties. You've got a Swedish-based think tank that has said for the first time they're adding America to its list of backsliding democracies. And then you've got the Brennan Center. They're showing that the restrictions on our voting rights are increasing from state to state to state to state. What say you about that? I mean, in the midst of this global conflict, you're still on the voting rights of Americans.
Thank you for having me on the show. Yes, we are in a constitutional crisis right now as it relates to voting. Even here in Georgia, last year after the passage of SB 202, which is a 98-page voter suppression bill, Georgia has now introduced 1464, which is now a 40-page voter suppression bill. So we are in a crisis of epic proportions, and the White House needs to realize that this is a serious threat to our democracy. I've been calling for an executive order for months. The White House needs to act. No more speeches. There needs to be action, because the midterms will be the canary in the coal mine, the true test. We saw in Texas epic returns of absentee ballots to the point of, I believe, 25% were rejected. We are seeing an assault, a full frontal assault on our democracy, while our executive branch seems to be in denial of what's happening. 19 states have passed some form of voter suppression law. Others are introducing new forms of voter suppression, whether it's voter purges, whether that's closing polls, whether it's local election takeovers. Georgia is now going to deputize the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to do election integrity investigations and having original jurisdiction to prosecute those. So we are seeing in real time across the South and all over this state an assault on our elections, simply because African Americans and other minorities voted on unprecedented numbers in 2020 and 2021. It is our turn to step up. It's time for our elected officials to take this seriously.
What say you, David? Yes, Reverend?
Indeed. Dr. Briggs, I do a weekly column for Chicago sometimes on Tuesday. I wish you would co-write my column this week. I want you to have the platform so you can deal with the executive order and the details that I can deal with it in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll connect you right after the show. David Daly, your thoughts?
Good morning, Santita. Good morning, Reverend.
Good
Pleasure
morning.
to be with you all again. What we are looking at here is indeed a major constitutional crisis, and we have new evidence of what the effect of these voting laws are this week as we begin to analyze the results from Texas's primary back on March 1st, which was the first election down there since the passage of their new voter suppression law that makes it much more difficult for voters to cast an early ballot. And what we're seeing is tens of thousands of votes in Texas that were cast via mail are being rejected, thrown out, effectively just tossed in the garbage. And what we are also seeing is perhaps no surprise. This is disproportionately affecting Black voters in Texas, in Houston, in Marion County, in the states, counties that have the largest populations of Black voters. This, yet again, is another example of not only the intent of these laws, but the effect, the real life effect of these laws. If you go back and look at what happened in Texas in 2020, there were 1 million absentee ballots in the state in 2020. Fewer than 9,000 of those were thrown out. So you go ahead and pass this law, and suddenly the number of rejected ballots and the number of rejected ballots by Black voters soars across the state of Texas. Why does it matter? Well, we know what the results were in so many close contested states in the 2020 elections. In Arizona, where 10,400 votes separated Joe Biden and Donald Trump. In Georgia, where it was about 11,700. In Wisconsin, where it was just over 20,000. And we know that the Electoral College could well have gone the other way than the national popular vote, if not for just tens of thousands of votes in those key states and 1 congressional district in Nebraska that awards its electorate by congressional district and not by statewide vote. So these close elections are in many ways what Republicans are trying to impact with a number of laws, state after state. What happens in Texas is not going to stay in Texas. It's going to follow these other places. And we are in for a world of hurt if we don't recognize, we don't have our eyes open to what's happening in state legislatures right now. We don't have our eyes open to what's happening in federal courts, and to really understand that these fundamental rights are under assault.
You know, John Nichols, you just returned from Europe. I mean, are you surprised that we have, a Swedish-based think tank that for the first time put us on their list of backsliding democracies? I mean, as you've written a book about, the fight for the soul of the Democratic Party, as you see that it's just always been a fight for freedom and liberties and for the vote. Are you surprised by any of what you're seeing? And do we need an executive order? Do you agree with that call for an executive order for our voting rights?
Sure. Thanks, Cynthia, and thanks for having me on this morning. And hi to the Reverend and all the good souls with us. First and foremost, of course, I agree with the call for an executive order. It's clear that the Congress has been destabilized. It is dysfunctional at this point because of the filibuster in the Senate and because of a number of other factors. Joe Biden has the power to act in some bold ways. He should do everything he can, and he should get his Justice Department ready to defend the actions that he takes. Also, those in Congress should, of course, keep pushing where they can, but they face incredible barriers. We should recognize that. Now to your core question. You asked, am I surprised? Well, the truth of the matter is, no, I'm not surprised. The United States was not started as a democracy. The United States, at its beginning, allowed only 4 or 5% of people to vote. Women were denied the right to vote. People of color were denied the right to vote, many of them enslaved. People who were in poverty were denied the right to vote. In some cases, religious dissenters were denied the right to vote. This is a country that had to battle decade after decade, generation after generation, century after century to expand the right to vote. We shouldn't doubt for a second that that right will always be under assault from those elites, those powerful individuals and groupings that believe it's easier to control through an authoritarian model or through some sort of hybrid rather than a full democracy. Still battle, there's no question. And I'll highlight just a couple of quick things before I finish, and that is we worry a lot about structural barriers that already exist, the Electoral College, the imbalance in the Senate, gerrymandering. We also worry about direct voter suppression, making it harder to do soul-split polls on Sunday, making it harder to get to polling places, making it harder to do early voting, all of that. But we should finally be extremely worried about a pattern that's developed in Texas, Wisconsin, and other states, where you see Republican legislators trying to take over the voting processes themselves and to institute an ability to overturn election results, literally to throw them out. That's what Donald Trump wanted to have happen in 2020. He failed narrowly. Now we see in state after state efforts to restructure the rules so that election results can be thrown out. That is the antithesis of democracy. It is taking us in exactly the right direction. It's why Freedom House and other groups have signaled that the United States is in a desperate point. And I'll close off by referencing the fact that this isn't just Freedom House or just a narrow group of folks. It's all over the place. The Economist magazine does an annual democracy index. In their latest index from February 9th, they moved the United States to the flawed democracy category. It's no longer recognized as a full democracy like Norway or New Zealand or Uruguay or Finland or Iceland. It's now a flawed democracy. And that's not a place that we should ever want to be. This ought to be a first and foremost concern of all of our policymakers and of everybody listening in on this conversation this morning.
Robert Patillo, you'll be on the air this afternoon on WAOK. Of course, you're the Southeastern Regional Director for Rainbow Push. And of course, your show is from 1 to 4 Eastern Standard Time. What say you? I mean, Georgia has been at the center of so much of this. You and Gerald Griggs, Attorney Griggs, have your work cut out for you.
Well, you know, I think most of us can look at the fact that the outcome of U.S. elections don't match the will of the American people anymore when it comes to determining whether or not we are a functioning democracy. In the last 32 years, Republicans have won the popular vote a grand total of one time in a presidential election, and that was in 2004. However, we have not seen broad Democratic majorities throughout that period of time. Democrats in the Senate represent 41 million more voters than the 50 Republicans in the Senate. You can look at the House, where there are millions more people represented by Democrats than Republicans, but yet and still we have this divided 50-50 government where you cannot get anything done regardless of the will of the American people or the mandate that they send you to Washington with. And because of this, we have to look at what is going on the state level that is feeding this dysfunction in Washington, D.C. And it has been a continuous effort at voter suppression on a state-by-state level over the course of the last quarter century to reverse the gains that we made during the civil rights movement. They've now taken voter suppression and renamed it voter integrity. They've now, instead of attacking the people preventing individuals from voting, started attacking the people counting the votes, because they understand that if we can't get them to vote for us, what we can do is change the people counting the votes so that we come out on top. So this is one of those insidious measures that we see start in some of the deep South conservative states, but then it metastasizes. It works its way throughout the country until it's the prevailing common law of the nation. And we've gotten so used to voter suppression at this point in America. Our general response is simply telling people to organize your way out of suppression, to register your way out of suppression. That instead of just getting the people you need to vote, you have to get 10 or 20% extra just to make up for what's being taken away by voter suppression. So we have to start taking this seriously as a nation and stop seeing it as simply being a black issue. Part of the problem that we have with mainstream Democrats is they see voter suppression as being a black issue until it's election time and they need black votes. And now if they start taking it seriously, we need them to take it seriously now.
Absolutely. Stay right there. Stay right there. Back in just a minute.
594-HOPE. That's 1-866-594-4673.
Yes,
Will
Reverend.
you stop calling? Will you stop calling So you call it white male supremacy, fascism.
What?
What it is. White male supremacy and fascism.
I got it.
Conservatism is the opposite of liberalism. This is another leg altogether.
Well,
And the 64 Democrats in 64 is Republican in order for this to happen. Wallace and those guys are Democrats. And I follow Jeff Davis.
well, what does Jonathan call it? He calls it a bipartisan betrayal. I mean, this has less to do with party. It's about power. You know, the party is just the means by pushing these things through. So, right? So,
Yeah, but in 64, John Wallace, all those guys were Democrats.
mm-hmm.
That came from the Republicans.
What?
Lincoln had a worldview, more of a union. The English slavery, secession, segregation, white male supremacy, and there's a difference.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
No, I got it. My dad, you need to get off so you can get some rest. You can listen, but you need to get some
Okay,
rest
baby.
because you sound tired.
Okay, baby.
And you got, and if you want to listen, you're more than welcome to listen, but I need you to rest.
I hear you guys. Okay.
All right?
Yes, ma'am.
So just stay there
I get it.
and just rest, please. Okay. We've got Anita. I'll go to Chris very quickly.
Good morning, Anita. What's your comment?
Did you say Anita?
Yes, Anita.
Okay. My comment is, I'm siding with Putin at this time because America is too guilty of mishandling their elections here and destroying democracy here, so they can't do anything outside of here. They're destroying it on the inside here.
Okay, hold on. Stand by.
1-866-594-4673.
People get ready. There's a train that comes.
Hey, everybody. Oh, almost 40 years ago, Reverend Jackson said there's a freedom train coming, but you need to get registered to ride on that Southern Crusade in 1983 as he was preparing for his the first of two historic presidential bids, which not only paved the way for a black president. No, it was not as simple as that. It crashed the glass ceiling for women. That's why you had Geraldine Ferraro on the ticket. He was the first top-tier candidate in presidential history to pledge to put a woman on his ticket, which pushed the Democrats to put a woman on the ticket in 1984. So much history was made, and indeed, you got a chance to see the unfairness in the system. Under the Democratic banner and under the Republican banner, the blocks to the vote, having to register 2-3 times to get registered once, all of that dual registration that was in the South. So much. So let's go to Chris. Chris from Oak Park, what's on your mind today? Good morning, Chris.
Make a couple observations. Hopefully, Reverend Jackson's okay. We've been backsliding as a country way longer than what they put on the body that they added America to it. We should have been added on there a long time. Anytime a citizen can't eat ice cream in their house without being shot and someone claiming it's their house, or you see the voter suppression on steroids, and we can, and this is not a blow to Ukraine, but we can stop doing business with Russia. The other countries can call them out. The United States needs to be called out, and they should have been called out a long time ago. And with the voter bill, the president needs to do something, like today, not wait to the end of the cycle, because with the midterms, coming along,
we should have been here something, you know, with that and get the Justice Department on board. But as you see, it's two kind of like two justice systems where you see Michael Madigan has harmed this state for 50 years. And then Mr. Smollett, I don't have a dog in the fight about him, but Mr. Smollett can have an agreement with the state's attorney and then a judge overturn it, and allegedly cost the city $130,000, but we have $900 million in police settlements and a 12% murder solve rate, and we can guard a Christopher Columbus statue no problems, and then you got a postal worker missing for 2 years. So we need to watch that on the local level, but holistically, the voter is voting wasn't important. They wouldn't bother it, and that's my comment.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he makes a lot of points, Reverend. You know, we want Jussie Smollett to pay this $100,000 plus back to the city or to the county or wherever it's supposed to go. But the police unions are not supposed to pay back the city. I mean, we're supposed to pay on their behalf. It is unbelievable. Reverend Jackson?
6 shot 16 times, gonna cover it up for 400 days. That's pretty raw.
Absolutely. But, you know, at the heart of that, and of course, you have to be a registered voter to get on those juries, Attorney Griggs. I mean, what are we looking at in terms of the vote? I mean, just real quick, because I'm going to have to get to John Nichols before he has to leave us in a couple of minutes. I mean, what is the plan? What should we do going forward? Because right now, Ukraine is all over the news. Some people might even think that it would be in poor taste to even mention this, but the elections are still going to be happening. You know, I mean, we're in 2022. The elections are about to start.
I mean, the plan is, again, as Robert Patillo said, we have to out-organize this. We have to overwhelm the ballot with voters, and that's the plan here in Georgia. But I do agree with you. We face an uphill battle, and that's why we cannot take our foot off of the gas with regard to this administration. Yeah, my heart goes out to Ukraine, but my heart goes out to Yemen and Iraq and Afghanistan and everything that's happening in Africa. There are many wars that are going on. We have to be focused on defending democracy both abroad and at home, and that's the message that has to cut through.
So, I mean, Robert Patillo, what are you doing on the ground in Georgia? And what do you advise us to do on the ground throughout the country? Robert Patillo? Well, you know, yes, Reverend.
Can the president do anything about that? What ground will you cover? I want you to have to write my columns with you and talk about what you can do is they're not doing.
Okay. What can the president do that he's not doing, Attorney Griggs?
You can sign an executive order that empowers the Justice Department to file lawsuits against the 19 states to stay these unconstitutional infringements of our voting rights. He can do that yesterday, today, or tomorrow. And so when I hear him speak in Atlanta, when I hear the vice president speak in Selma, I appreciate those great words, but words are done at this point. We need action. We need an executive order that empowers the Justice Department to go after the 19 states for the violation of the Constitution by these unlawful voter suppression laws that violate the Constitution, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, as well as violate the Voting Rights Act.
John Nichols, you know, you're about to go, but you've written a book about the fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. This seems to be at the heart of, well, the Republic, but certainly it seems to be a real fight for the Democratic Party. Do you see any organizing afoot to, I mean, is there a push for this? Because so many Democratic votes in particular could get lost.
Sure. There are definitely some Democrats who are highly engaged with these issues and are very involved. Some of them are running for office, like he went down in Georgia as running for Secretary of State. There are others, particularly secretaries of state around the country, Democratic ones, who stood up and fought very, very hard on these issues. But it's important to understand that the Democratic Party has not often acted in its own best interest in this regard. Too frequently, Democrats, when they get power, focus on a narrow agenda without recognizing that they have, core responsibilities as regards to defense of democracy. If the Democrats, when they are in power, do not expand small d democracy, if they don't expand democratic protections, then we end up in a kind of constant process of moving backwards. Because when the Republicans get in power, they constrict democracy. They move it backwards. And so if Democrats don't move it forward, the steady process is one of decline. And this is something people have to understand. We shouldn't just be talking about battling voter suppression, although that's central right now. We should also be talking about how we expand democracy in America. When there's the institutions we're talking about, the Economist, Freedom House, and others, rate countries, right? They aren't just moving the U.S. down because of all these threats to voting rights in the U.S. They're also moving us down because other countries are doing more to make their systems work. And that's the thing that we need to understand. We should have universal, easy voter registration. Anybody who turns 18, you're on the roll, and the information comes to you. You don't have to seek it out. We shouldn't make people jump through hoops to vote. And also, we should recognize that education and media relates to democracy. And in a country where our education system is often under assault and where our media system is in decline, we are not sustaining democracy and the information that's needed about it. So we're in a crisis situation. And anybody who suggests to you that you shouldn't talk about this because there are other bad things going on in the world, because there are other challenges in other places, they're way off the mark. I mean, the United States, if it is to be an effective and powerful moral leader in the world, if it is to be on the right side of history globally, it has to get its own act together at home. That strengthens the hand of President Biden and of others when they are trying to talk about democracy in Ukraine or talk about democracy in Asia, talk about democracy any place else in the world. So this is exactly the right time to be doing it. And also, one closing thing I'll say is, I've covered politics for a very long time. And one thing I know is that the American people can keep two thoughts in their head at the same time. They can be concerned about democracy at home.
Amen to that. David Daly, what say you?
We have to keep in mind here that things can and will get worse if we do not take action now to defend voting rights, to strengthen democracy, and to reform our institution. We are going through right now a redistricting processing, like that. Yet another part like that is going to see the number of competitive seats shrink to the lowest number in the modern era, and even worse at the state legislative level around the country. After the 2018 election, 59 million Americans, just about 1 in 6 of us, living in a state where one or both chambers of the state legislature controlled by the party that won fewer votes. And every single one of those times, all 59 million of those people lived in states where Democratic candidates won more votes, held power. Nevertheless, you've got the U.S. Senate, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, but the 50 Democrats represent 41.6 million more people. And the demographic trends there are worsening as well. By 2035, by 2040, you're going to have 70% of the Senate going to 30% of the population. So you think the filibuster is bad now? Wait until these smaller, whiter, rural states have even greater hammerlock over the U.S. Senate, and the effect that has on tilting the Electoral College in their direction as well. we've got to be really concerned about the conservative supermajority on the U.S. Supreme Court that, and we have to be reminded again and again that this is a conservative supermajority that has been appointed by presidents that lost the U.S. popular vote and then confirmed by a U.S. Senate that black majority support. They are looking independent state legislative doctrine right now, whack the doodle that would effectively give the state legislatures already showing their authoritarian and effectively give them veto power over their state constitutions to impose whatever kind of elected procedures they want to do. You think, well, the U.S. Supreme Court can't possibly do that. There's already a vote for this. There's potentially a fourth Brett Kavanaugh. Don't know how John Justice Barrett is going to on this. So we ought to be there's a seismic earthquake heading towards our election. We got to, and we've squandered effectively the last 2 years in which we needed talking about this day one, even if it was never going to get through the U.S. Senate. We have to be thinking about how we add states and add senators and why that is an important thing for democracy. We have to be talking about Supreme Court reform and why that's crucial to democracy. We haven't had this conversation.
Frank Watkins? Yes, Reverend.
The engineer, well, I'm going to clear up the feedback, several feedback. That's all we can say. Echo chamber.
Okay.
We should stop calling racist, fascist, and conservative the flip side of democracy as Democrats. Conservative Democrats, like a Rockefeller person, and liberal Democrats. We're dealing with a third column called racist, fascist. They don't believe in democracy at all. The Democrats believe in democracy. The Democrats believe in democracy. Two sides of the same coin, but this is a third coin. Fascist is a third coin altogether.
Well, Frank Watkins, why don't you explain that, Frank Watkins? I have a couple of minutes before we go to break.
I didn't hear the last.
Well, what about? Well, he's been talking about. The Reverend was talking about really looking at these conservatives, and it's not just Republicans. I mean, people who stand in the way of the vote. You know that this is really fascism. That this is white male supremacy. That this is. I think we need to really call it what it is, so that we can be alarmed by what it is.
It's not fascism yet, but it's clearly heading in that direction.
What would make it fascism?
He's or the study in Sweden and so forth about America no longer being really a legitimate democracy. You don't have to go to Sweden or abroad. You can go to Wall Street. Forbes has an independent group that they've set up, started in 2006. I believe it's called the Forbes Democracy Index. The United States has never ranked very high. 17th is the highest we've ranked on that list, and now we're out of the top 20. They have 4 tiers, good democracy, democracy that's threatened, threatening to establish a autocracy, and then pure democracy are the 4 categories. We've moved down to the second tier where our democracy is threatened. I've been arguing for several weeks now that we have minority rules that are disproportionately affecting people of color that is leading to white minority rule. For example, the Electoral College disproportionately affects the presidential election. Redistricting disproportionately affects the House of Representatives. I'll come back to that in a minute. The filibuster disproportionately affects the Senate, and voter suppression disproportionately affects people of color in the state. So the presidency, the U.S. House of Representatives, the Senate, and the states are all being jeopardized because of these minority rules. Now, there's a lot of focus that Biden won the presidency by 7 million votes. The reality is he won it by 65,000 votes. I think someone mentioned Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia. If you total the difference of how much Biden won those states by, I think Arizona 11, 21,000 or something like that in Wisconsin, and then 11 or 12,000 in Georgia. If you total that, those wins, that's 43,000 votes. If you switch those votes, the Electoral College would be tied. And because Maine and Nebraska elect their electoral votes by congressional district, Biden would have won the presidency by one electoral vote because he won the second district in Nebraska. So he didn't win the presidency by 7 million popular votes. He won by 65,000 votes in key states, which gave him the Electoral College vote.
Hold that thought. No, hold that thought. I want you to deal with us on the other side of the break, because that's something that we really need to understand, that every vote counts, everywhere, all the time, which is why you need to have your voting rights secured. Attorney Gerald Griggs of the NAACP in Atlanta has been calling for, and everyone here have been calling for, an executive order for our voting rights. We need them, everybody. Please tune in to rainbowpush.org. We have our Wall Street project that begins tomorrow. We're going to have the mayor of New York, Reverend Jackson, is going to be ringing the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Tremendous tribute to him. But we want you to go to rainbowpush.org. So if you can't be there in person with us, you can join us virtually. Get registered, everybody. More of Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm Santita Jackson. Back in just a minute.
Coming up, we'll have closing thoughts from Reverend Jesse Jackson right here on.
Okay, Reverend?
Yes.
Okay, we can hear that even, okay?
Okay.
We can hear it all.
I was saying that the engineer has an echo. I guess.
That's the
Feel it for a moment, then we'll right back.
that can only be put up in the speakers.
Okay, we have to put it up in the speaker
So
because
feedback is
remember we have a new system, Dad. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, no problem.
Well, we have to put it up in the speaker. I thought you were going to go and get some rest. You're more than welcome to say it is your show, but make sure you get some rest today.
I'm on way to such a speak to a Korean congregation.
You're going to do
An Asian
what?
congregation. We speak to an Asian congregation today about Asian attacks. It didn't tell last week, Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese Internment Act. This is another new thing. So I'm supposed to read it there, okay? Okay. Yeah, one of the first laws was the Chinese
Exclusion Act?
what was it called?
Exclusion Act.
Exclusionary Act, yes. The Japanese internment camps in World War II. Thank you very much. I did it. What the meeting happened today?
I'm sorry?
What the meeting happened today?
What did you say?
Whoever meeting happened today.
You want to do what?
Whoever meeting happened today.
I can't understand you, Dad.
That's my problem. Whoever meeting happened today about that, I can't tell.
Well, no.
So I said that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand.
It's just,
I understand.
Yeah, well, and there's no rest, no therapy. That's what happens. So you gotta do something about that. Because everyone online wants to know if you're okay. So just know that.
I appreciate you.
Mm-hmm.
Also, that said about the Intimidation.
No, we're not gonna do any. I'm gonna put you on. We're gonna put Reverend on hold, and that's gonna be that because we're gonna have to let Reverend go because he's got to get ready to go to church.
Well, I know, so I'm thinking the Asian church today.
I got it. I'll say that, but I'm gonna let you go now.
About the Asian bashing.
I got you. We're letting you go now.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Yep. Let him go. He is tired. Okay, how much time do we have? David Daly?
Hello?
Okay, I'm gonna give you, you'll have about a minute and 15 to give your closing remarks.
You got it.
How's Wyatt doing?
30 seconds.
Stand by.
We're out at 58:27.
All right. Hey, Hannah from South Carolina, Laura, Alana, James, all of you.
Come up at 10.
You're listening to Keep Hope Alive. We want to hear from you. Please email your questions or comments to Reverend Jesse Jackson at keephopealiveradio.com.
Hey everybody, go on and get registered for the Rainbow Push Wall Street Project at rainbowpush.org. Do it today. We start tomorrow in New York and Tuesday. So please be a part of the conference. David Daly, your closing thoughts on the vote. You've got 1 minute.
Sounds alarmed this morning about really concerning legal theory that's making its way through the U.S. Supreme Court. It's called the Independent State Legislature Doctrine, and it is the product of really decades of work among conservative legal circles, and it makes the argument that under the Elections Clause of the U.S. Constitution, the word legislature in there means only the legislature. So not the governor. The governor can't veto anything the state legislature does on elections. Not the state Supreme Court. They can't review and call unconstitutional anything that the legislature does. Effectively, the state legislature becomes an unfettered body able to make its own decisions on all of these important topics. As we look around the country right now, we see that they are more than willing to do this. This just got to the U.S.
I got 10 seconds. Hold on. Hold that thought.
Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. For more information on upcoming shows and guests, please visit our website at www.keephopealiveradio.com.
You know what, David, I'm going to give you the top of the next hour just to give your closing remarks. And Reverend Yeri, you'll be able to get in on this discussion, but I really need you to flesh out Wall Street in 2 minutes for us so that people will go to that. Boy. Are you in New York, Reverend Yeri?
This evening.
Oh, okay, very good. Will you be able to do the good news on my show in the morning?
Just put a question mark there until I get with Reverend and see what the plan is.
Okay, let me know as soon as you can so that I can fill the slot.
All right.
Thanks so much. All right, everybody, stand by. We are at 30 seconds. Hey, Lisa Weathers from Arkansas. You all are tuning in from everywhere. Thank you so much. Sending you much, much, much love today.
Good morning and welcome to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson.
I'm sorry, Frank, I was distracted. What did you just say?
There's a terrible shooting in Cuba, Arkansas, the Black Belt of Arkansas.
Really?
One person dead, 20 wounded. Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened there? What was that?
It was outside of an auto show. I don't know.
Stand by.
Okay, hold on a minute. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson, Sunday, March 20th, 2022. I'm Santita Jackson. Hope you'll join me on my show on the nation's largest progressive talk radio station every Monday through Friday. Do the morning drive on WCPT 820 in Chicago and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and on my YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, which is where we're streaming right now, and Santita Jackson and Friends, my page. Please, throughout the week, stay in touch with Reverend Jesse Jackson at rainbowpush.org or call him at 773-FREEDOM. This week we're in New York at the Rainbow Push Wall Street Conference, the 25th year. Wow. Reverend will be ringing the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow. What a tremendous honor. We're going to hear from Reverend Dr. Todd Urey, Esquire, about that very shortly. We want to dedicate the show today to Mary D. and Purvis Span. Who are they? Those of us who are in Chicago know them, but we wouldn't be on television and radio had it not been for these trailblazing Black American people. Mary D. broke so many barriers for women and for Black women to get on television and to be on radio. And many people remember when she was kidnapped, leaving an interview, shot in the head, left for dead. She recovered miraculously, thank God, and she became a beacon internationally for victims' rights, or should I say for survivors' rights. And she, almost 90 years of age, so beautiful, so splendid, kept working until she could work no more. We love you, Mary D. Purvis Span, brilliant on-air personality, both of them. But he also broke new ground as an owner of WVON. This 1,000-watt station became the #1 station in Chicago. Indeed, he is the man who crowned Aretha Franklin, Queen of Soul, made B.B. King the King of the Blues. It just keeps on going. A legend in the world of radio, in the world of business. When African American performers did not have a place to perform, they knew they could come to Chicago and perform at venues that he owned and get paid. Oh, we thank God for Purvis Span today. And we thank God for his family, for his brilliant daughter, Melody Span Cooper, who is at the helm of WVON today. Sending you much love. Indeed, that is our home station here in Chicago. Everybody, let's talk about our voting rights in the midst of this widening conflict between Ukraine, the United States, and Russia. That's being debated all over the world. A lot of different points of view, depending upon where you live and what you've experienced. We are debating right now our voting rights in the United States. Freedom House is an American organization that's been around since the Second World War. They warn against autocracies and repression that they've seen on the march all around the world. Well, they say you better watch it because now they've had to issue a special report on the United States. They've never had to do that. They've noted that the United States has slid down its ranking of countries by political rights and civil liberties. 59th we're on the list now, below Argentina and Mongolia. Indeed, this International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance in Stockholm, Sweden, says that the United States is now on its list of backsliding democracies. Of course, Reverend Frank Watkins reminds us of the Forbes Democracy Index. We're now on the second tier. We keep sliding and sliding, and we do not have our vote secured. So even as we're looking at war overseas, we have a fight on our hands here, right on these shores, for our vote. Can't wait to talk with you about it. Call us at 1-866-594-HOPE, 1-866-594-4673. Let's talk about it right here on Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson.
opinion counts. 1-866.
Okay. Coming right to everybody, and then we will get right to it. Okay. I gotta get out of here myself. Okay. Okay. Sorry, everybody. I have had to look at something else. Something else. Oh, okay. Can you get Dell?
Oh, yep.
Okay, David, I'll give you these closing remarks, and I promise you I will let you go. Reluctantly, but will.
I promise I'll try to actually talk in a minute.
No, you're fine. I'll give you a couple of minutes. I gotta throw off this nasty, this waste of hot chocolate. This was horrible. I need to do everybody a favor and throw out all the pods. It's gross. Totally gross.
Good morning.
Good morning, Attorney Daryl Jones.
Totally gross.
Yes, hi, how you doing?
Good.
Messing up my taste buds. Okay.
Daryl Jones.
Yep, backsliding democracy. That's it. Is it Elena or Alina? I want to pronounce it correctly. Oh boy. Okay.
Right, 20 seconds.
Okay.
You're listening to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Call 1-866-594-HOPE. That's 1-866-594-4673.
Hey everybody, get up and stand up for your rights. Thank you, Jeremy. That's right, we do need that today. Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm Santita Jackson. Let's talk about getting up and standing up for our rights. People are doing it all around the world, but we have to do it in the United States. What about our voting rights, which is the foundation upon which all of our other rights rest? We still don't have them. Attorney Gerald Griggs, who's going to be writing Reverend Jackson's column along with him this week, is going to be talking about an executive order for voting rights. That he said, this is not inconveniencing the president. For us not to have our voting rights protected is an inconvenience to all of us, and it's a danger to the entire republic and to these democratic elements that we hold dear. We are joined by Attorney Daryl Jones, the chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. He and Attorney Robert Arnwine are doing such a fantastic job. Attorney Robert Patillo, who is the Southeastern Regional Director for Rainbow Push. He is also the host of his own show on WAOK. I encourage you to listen to it this afternoon from 1 to 4 Eastern Standard Time. It's a fantastic show. And of course, Reverend Frank Watkins, I'm going to get back to you, Reverend Watkins. He and Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. wrote the book, co-wrote the book, A More Perfect Union, Advancing New American Rights. And you need to get that book. It's the 20th anniversary edition that is out now. And before I get to you, David Daly, Reverend Dr. Uri, we are gathering in New York for the 25th Wall Street Project. Wow. Why are we gathering there this year?
Years since the first convening of the Wall Street Conference. We've not been able to convene every year. The first year of the pandemic kind of threw us off, but we're back on track. The reason we're convening is not only to highlight 25 years of important work that Reverend Jackson has led, but also to recognize that civic engagement has economic consequences, and it shows up on Wall Street each and every day. When we recognize that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a theme, if there's no substance under it, then we come away with recognizing that there's profiteering with exclusion. And so this year we're coming together to talk about what's happening, not only since the 1997 convening at the end of the Clinton years, when the economy was strong, but diversity was weak, and 25 years later, where the economy arguably is stronger for some, but we still don't see the levels of participation, whether it's in access to capital, or what's happening in the marketplace. 32 NFL teams that have their own kind of insular economic system that allows them to pick and choose who gets in and who's left out. We're going to have conversations about what's happening with minority money managers, who is handling pension funds, federal government dollars that are used, and in the transaction, certain groups actually are able to make money. And so we're going to talk about those links. We're going to talk about the link between faith and labor, how in this moment when there's so much regression around voting rights, the labor movement and the faith movement in communities is actually going to help us with the ground game across the country when we get to the midterm elections this year. But we're also going to have a conversation about business. New York Mayor Eric Adams is going to be with us for the luncheon on Monday. And so we're going to have a conversation about what do we see, not just for the past 25 years, but what's going to be the agenda laid out for the next 25 years. And so we'll be in person on Monday, virtual on Tuesday. Reverend Jackson is going to ring the closing bell at the Stock Exchange on Monday afternoon to acknowledge the important work. He's going to convene the stakeholders to talk about what needs to be done. And we know he's going to lay it out with candor, but also with passion. And if you want to be a part of it, and we want you to be a part of it, for more information, all you got to do is go to rainbowpush.org and be a part of this year's 25 years since we came together for the Wall Street Project in 1997. But there's more work to be done, and it can't be done without you.
Amen to that. Amen to that. David Daly, I know you're running this morning. Of course, New York Times bestselling author of Rat Effed, and his latest book is Unrigged. What do you want us to know about this fight for our voting rights specifically? I mean, as more and more people around the world are beginning to look at the United States and say, there's something going on here, and it's not right. You're not as free as you think you are.
Backsliding on democracy, but we're not backsliding on democracy by accident. We're backsliding on democracy quite intentionally because there are authoritarian elements inside of our politics that are eager to take us backwards to that time, that they are looking around at what has become a multiracial nation, and they're standing in the way of it becoming a true multiracial democracy. They are trying to effectively create a sealed circle that locks in their control. It involves drawing the lines of state legislative and congressional districts in such a way that they can't lose. Then once they take that power, passing election laws that make it even harder for folks who disagree with them, for communities of color to cast their ballots, that make it more difficult in close states like Georgia and Wisconsin and Arizona to vote. And now they are advancing legal theory at the U.S. Supreme Court, and they've already got 3 or possibly 4 justices on board for this. A legal theory called the Independent State Legislative Doctrine that would effectively give these state legislatures unfettered control to create election procedures free from any veto by the governor or any intervention by state Supreme Courts. This is really, it's unhistoric, it's undemocratic, and it would be a seismic earthquake on our electoral politics if they had a 5th vote for this. It reinforces the urgency of this moment. It reinforces the urgency of the 2022 midterms. It reinforces the urgency of Secretary of State and state Supreme Court races down ballot that are just so important that we've got to be paying attention to. And also the importance of keeping up the fight for the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, for House Bill 1, and for real presidential action on this. Nothing less than our democracy at stake.
David Daley, New York Times bestselling author, rat-effed, and his latest book is Unrigged. It's always a joy to be with you. Our love to your family this morning. Everybody wants you to continue to call us at 1-866-594-HOPE, 1-866-594-4673. Frank Watkins, you continue to remind us that every single vote counts. Indeed, you've been saying that President Biden did not actually win by 7 million votes. You said it was more like 60+ thousand. Please explain.
Well, as indicated, in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia, Biden won those states by a cumulative total of 43,000 votes. I think around 11,000 in Arizona, 21,000, 22,000, something like that in Wisconsin, and around 11,000 in Georgia. So if you switch those votes to the Trump column, you actually have a tie for the Electoral College vote. And Biden would have won not by 7 million, but by 1 electoral vote, because in Maine and Nebraska, they don't cast their electoral votes by states, but by congressional districts. And Biden won the 2nd congressional district in Nebraska, so he would have won that 1 electoral vote and been elected president by 1 vote, not by 7 million. We're proud of the massive turnout that we think, well, that actually did come out, over 158 total votes in 2020, a record over 81 million for Biden, and a record over 74 million for Trump. What people are missing, however, is that 80 million people who are perfectly eligible to vote by age and citizenship didn't vote. So there were enough people that didn't vote that they could have almost elected their own president over the 81 million votes that Biden got.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it's just every single vote does matter. It really, really does. Attorney Gerald Griggs, you've been calling for an executive order for voting rights, and then we keep hammering away at it. But in this time of tumult all around the world, it's easy for Americans, many of whom, more than a few, are beginning to volunteer to go to Ukraine, but we don't have these rights secured here. Not our vote. We are under attack, and I don't even know if we really, really understand that, Attorney Griggs.
Absolutely, and we're in a constitutional crisis. It's time for Americans to realize that not only do we have to fight for democracy abroad, but we have to continue to fight for democracy at home. And so, as I said earlier, my heart goes out to all of the conflicts around the world. But we have to make sure we protect those most sacred rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution to all Americans. And that's why it's incumbent upon the President of the United States to sign an executive order empowering the Attorney General to go after all 19 of these states that are passing regressive and unconstitutional voting laws that will suppress the vote of brown and black people and people that do not vote the way they want them to vote. So, you know, in a representative democracy, you should never be able to pick your voters. The voters should be able to pick their politicians. And so that's why it's incumbent that we continue to raise this call. The president has the power to do it yesterday, today, and tomorrow to sign an executive order empowering the Justice Department to use all of its tools to go after these violations of the law and violations of the Constitution.
Attorney Darrell Jones, you and Attorney Barbara Arnwine are doing such magnificent work in the Transformative Justice Coalition. This is work that you do day in, day out, aside from the other work that you do. What about this executive order? Because it's like our Justice and Policing Act, it's stuck. Our voting rights, it's stuck. We have got a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court. One shudders to think what will happen if any of these cases get to the Supreme Court. What would happen? How much further we might be pushed back. Where do we go from here? As more and more people all around the world are recognizing that America is what this Swedish think tank said, that we're a backsliding democracy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Santita, and you're directly on point. We are a backsliding democracy, but that's nothing new. That's not something that has just occurred. You know, I think a part of what we have to remember is that this goes back to the 1800s. We know that following slavery, that there was a pushback on democracy, right? When black men got the right to vote from the 1860s, there immediately became the acknowledgement that there was a problem because black men now were getting elected to office and using that power, and then there began an immediate threat to the voting rights, and that's how we ended up with the Night Riders, the Klan, and everyone else suppressing that vote. We carry that forward to 2008. When we come to 2008, we have the election of Barack Obama. What then immediately happens? We end up having all of these challenges that go forward, and we have voter suppression that occurs for black and brown voters so that there will not be another resurgence of this great black vote that went on to bring into power President Obama. Well, then what then happens? We go through and we have Raphael Warnock and Ossoff that get elected, and we have great black-brown turnout that occurs from the 2020 election. Now we're seeing the result of that the challenge to democracy from that, with all of the voter suppression legislation we see happening around the country. Whether you're looking at Texas and the 24-hour ban on voting, or whether you're looking at Texas and the ban on drive-up voting, or the ban on food and water while they close voting places to create long lines. If you're looking at what's happening now with the vote by mail challenges to make it more difficult for people to vote by mail, this is all a reactive piece to black and brown and young people exercising that democratic right to vote. So yeah, we need this executive order. The executive order could go as far as to say that they can direct any federal agency, any federal piece of government to encourage people to use their power to have voters be able to vote. It's not just the Department of Justice, it's any part of the federal government. You can make voting accessible that way. You can teach voting that way. And what is happening in a lot of the states across the nation, where they're putting in these restrictive measures to make it more difficult, you can have teaching tools that are coming out federally from the federal agencies, telling people what they need to do to be certain that they're hitting all the buttons, that they're doing everything that's necessary to be able to vote. Why is this so important? I'll tell you why this is so important. What we know and what David Daley so brilliantly touched on was the move for the state control of the election panels, moving it away from federal control. Well, if we're not out during this midterm election, and we're electing various local pieces, judges, prosecutors, etc., what will happen is it will further decay the voting rights of individuals, because that's what we see happening. When you hear us talking about the 34 pieces of legislation, of voter suppression legislation that have been passed in the 19 states across the country, what we're doing is that this stuff is being challenged in state court. And if the state Supreme Court judges are not being challenged, if they're not having the ability to elect fair-minded judges, it all rolls downhill. And so, we do this big push. We do the big push for the Freedom to Vote Act, because we know that if we can get it all on a level playing field, on the federal level, that then we know that our returning residents that have been incarcerated, the 13 million of them that have been disenfranchised from voting, will have that fair opportunity to be able to cast that vote. We know that those that are being discouraged and everything else from voting will have that opportunity. They'll know what they need to do. It'll all be even across the field. So is there a challenge that's going on right now to our right to vote? Absolutely. Absolutely. And the question right now is whether or not we will be able to get our voters out for this midterm election, because everything is on the table right now for this midterm election. And that's the reason that Barbara Arnwine and I are all over the country pushing for people to be certain they have the right to vote. Same reason with Tasha Brown and Cliff Albright and all the others that are out there, the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. All of us are out there. NAACP with Gerald Griggs. That's the reason that we understand and appreciate the big push. The last piece I wanted to say on this, Santita, is this. We know that tomorrow begins this process of the confirmation hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Understand this, and this is what I really want people to hear very clearly. We would not be going through this process for the confirmation of Ketanji Brown Jackson, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, if it were not for the Black and brown voters coming out and pushing and getting President Biden in office. That's the direct connection to voting, that we have this historical moment that's coming up. And that's why it's important that we be certain to protect that right to vote with every sinew on our body.
And Reverend Dr. Yuri, your thoughts?
Well, there are a couple of thoughts. One is from 2015 to 2024, that's been designated the International Decade of People of African Descent. And when the United Nations team visited the U.S. in 2016, one of the first things they noted in their report that late summer was the concern about the encroachment on voting rights and its impact on African Americans in particular, but on minorities more broadly. And so this is not a new thing. It's been brewing for a while. And this notion that state legislatures can operate independently of judicial scrutiny in and of itself is an affront to the notion of democracy. And so what we have to be ready to do as part of this conversation around halting these regressive laws being passed, we need a ground game and a set to make sure that more people vote this time, not fewer. One of the reasons we have this issue is because we stopped paying attention to down ballot races. Governors appoint judicial vacancies subject to election in many states. And we've not paid attention to who's sitting on district and circuit courts, who's sitting on state Supreme Courts, state appellate courts. And so what we have allowed to happen, because we took our eye off the ball, is that we've allowed this infrastructure of erosion to actually cause ground to crumble under our. And it is time to make sure, as Darrell Jones and others have made very clear, that we've got to pay attention to the entire ballot, not just the big shiny thing at the top of the ballot, so we can make sure that.
Stay right there, everybody. And go to rainbowpush.org so you can be part of the Rainbow Push Wall Street Project. Go there right now, get registered. Back with more People Alive in just a few minutes. 2 minutes.
Don't give up the fight. Life is your right. Get up, stand up. We can't give up the fight. Stand up for the right. Lord.
Your opinion counts. 1-8.
Derek, I liked your building on the what happened after the Civil War Reconstruction, comparing it to what's happening today, because you know, once you had the first Reconstruction after the troops were pulled out in 1877, you had the growth of the Klan, you had the lynchings, and you had the Democratic Redeemers who retook control of the states. After the second Reconstruction, the 1950s, 60s, and so forth, you get the reaction, especially after, as you mentioned, Barack Obama was elected in 2008. There was a record turnout of black voters in 2012 for the first time in history. As a percentage of turnout, black voters outdistanced white voters. 2040, you have the projected majority minority country in the United States, and now you have a massive percentage. I think, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's a very high percentage of Republicans who are saying we may have to turn to violence to, quote unquote, save our democracy. So there's lots of parallels there that you hit right on the point.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And it's just been, you know, amazing to watch those parallelisms as they arise. And they, you know, you're 100% right in terms of, you know, the violent response that is being proposed. You know, we've seen them going to polling places to try to intimidate black voters and brown voters. But it's just amazing to watch this come into fruition.
Can you talk about this on the air, please?
What? And while during the first, well, the Redeemer Democrats retook control of the government, now they're going after control of the vote. That's the one part I left out.
No.
Got 20 seconds.
Put it on
As
the
you
air.
mentioned.
Put it on the air, gentlemen. Thank you. Coming up, hi, Sheila.
It was also a states'
Stand
rights
by.
court.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. People get ready. There's a train a-coming. Reverend Jackson said that in 1983. People get ready. There's a freedom train a-coming, but you got to be registered to vote to ride. And that is as true today as it was then, if not truer, everybody. We've made so much progress. And then you have the forces, countervailing forces who are trying to push us back. I'm Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you today. I hope you'll meet me on my radio show on the largest progressive talk radio station. Used to be Air America, but today it's WCPT. AM 950 Radio, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota out of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. And Santita Jackson and friends from 6 to 8, Monday through Friday. Progressive talk, everybody. So let us talk about our voting rights. We've got some callers who want to talk with us, but you know, the conversation is always so exciting. That's why you have to tune in to us on YouTube and on Facebook, because you don't want to miss these side conversations that we have. Frank Watkins and attorney Darrell Jones, before I get to the rest of the panel. You all were discussing, starting with you, Attorney Jones, the intimidation that black and brown voters are experiencing at the polls. What do you mean? What's happening?
You know, what we see happening around the country is that there's all types of voter intimidation that occurs at the polls currently, and it occurs in different ways. We know that during the 2020 election, that there would show up these in some polling places throughout the North and the South, people in the South that were permitted to have guns that were at the polls. There would be white folks with guns and long coats and things like that, intimidating black voters, because they would go to black polling places as a form of intimidation. They would have flags that are flying. They'd have Confederate flags that are flying, all kinds of flags that are flying, trying to intimidate black voters that are at the poll. And this occurred across the country, and not necessarily the gun part of it, but the intimidation part of it, trying to intimidate the black and brown voters from coming out to vote. There were some states, there's some polling places that would have police officers that were there in a form of intimidation as well. So, we had all kinds of voter intimidation that was actually going on at the polling places. And as Reverend Watkins, Frank Watkins and I were discussing, this isn't something that was simply done from 2020. This is something that was historically put in place to try to suppress Black and brown voters, from particularly Black voters, from coming out to vote and to use their franchise. And Frank, did you want to sort of go over what we had spoken about a little earlier with regard to the historical relevance?
Well, I was just pointing out that the parallels you were making, I said Derek and Daryl as meant, the parallels you were making were exactly on point during and after the first Reconstruction, when Black people were voting, making progress, being elected to office and so forth. The Redeemer Democrats, quote unquote, used violence to end the voting and to take control, retake control of state governments in the Confederacy. Today, they're not just going after state government, they're going after the people who count the votes. So it's not just a matter of your being able to vote, it's to have your vote actually count and not be overturned by the people who are supposed to be fairly counting your vote. And then I pointed out that a very high percentage, I don't remember exactly, 40 or 60, I don't remember if it's 40 or 60% of Republicans have agreed that we may have to use violence to, quote unquote, save our democracy. So that's what we were having in discussion. I would simply point out also that it was the Supreme Court that was a states' rights Supreme Court after the Civil War that ended the first Reconstruction with the decisions in Cruikshank and the slaughterhouse cases. And now we have a conservative and some instances and extreme members on the Supreme Court. And there will be critical cases involving choice, involving gun rights, involving affirmative action, involving voting rights that are coming before this court during this session. So we may again face, some difficult times because of a states' rights court. And I wanted to make one correction, or a little. I certainly support the use of executive orders and so forth, but the Constitution does not protect all Americans' rights. You have a right to vote, but it's a state right. It's not a constitutional right. And I often point out the ultimate irony with the Heller case in 2008, which guaranteed, using the Second Amendment, that you have an individual fundamental right to a gun, but there is no fundamental individual right to vote in the U.S. Constitution. Your right to vote is protected by your state. And when you have states like Texas and Georgia that are threatening your vote, you can see how vulnerable your right to vote and how vulnerable democracy is. Finally, I would say we should note the difference of how Biden is treating Ukraine defending its democracy. And make no mistake, Russia's invasion and destruction of Ukraine is an attack on democracy, not just in Ukraine, but everywhere in the world. And you see how Biden is fighting to save democracy in Ukraine, but you don't see the same militancy to protect democracy in the United States.
That's very interesting. When you watch the news shows from the global south, that is to say the so-called third world that they've been relabeled, they talk about that. And they talk about just a lot of the unevenness, the voter intimidation, interestingly enough, that they see committed against Black and brown people, and a lot of the things that we've done to disrupt democracies. There's a lot of work that we have to do. in the United States, and that is our charge. Let me go to Fred from Los Angeles. Fred, what's on your mind today? Good morning, Fred.
Joe, giving everybody a lesson on civics. And Frank, the 26th Amendment gives everybody 18 years old the right to vote. Nobody told me I can't vote, so let me take that off the table. St. Peter, your father and Frank Watkins got me a motivated call. So I'm going to address what's going on right now is legal, but there's no racism involved in it. And then you guys mentioned the filibuster. Yeah, in the past, it was a bad thing, but it can be used as a good thing to stop bad legislation. You want to respond, Frank?
But respond to what exactly, Fred? What is your question? No, just be specific. What do you want him to respond to? Okay.
That's true. It's not being used that way, however. It's being used to curb any democratic progressive legislation that comes before the Senate. But you're right, it could be used to stop bad legislation. It could be used to achieve bipartisanship, but it's not being used that way. McConnell is using the exact opposite way that you're proposing that it could be used. Yes, it could be used in many other ways that one could justify, but that's not the way it is being used.
Okay, the point is, though, the way it's being used, though, racism isn't being injected into it. And by the way, the Justice Department, the Civil Rights Division, can go after any state with a civil lawsuit for any bad legislation or something that violates the Constitution. They don't need an executive order. And I'll leave you guys with that. Thanks.
And then I'll respond. Basically, the Justice Department is being forced to go after these states. Yes, they can, and in a fully functioning, correctly functioning Justice Department, they would. But in Georgia, we had to force them to sue the state, just like in Texas, we had to force them to sue the state. So I understand how it's supposed to function. I'm telling you, it's not functioning appropriately, and the president needs to step in with an executive order, making sure that it functions appropriately.
Let's go to Anita from North Carolina. Anita, what's on your mind? Hey, Anita.
The movement is the hero. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You're the hero because Putin is saying you already mistreated those people for 500 years. Martin Luther King dealt with you nonviolently and you shot him in his head. So if you're running around changing the government in Ukraine and in Gaddafi's town and Hassan Hussein, what's his name? You're changing all these governments, and then you're setting up situations where you're going to target me. He said, no, you don't follow your democracy. Then you want me to force me to follow you. When you shot Martin Luther King in the head, and Reverend Jackson needs to go to Ukraine and go to Russia and tell them about Ukraine, they got a bad situation. We was met with fire hoses and billy clubs and dogs when we tried to fight for something. And the girl over there, I think Reverend Jackson and your brothers, and you need to go over there and tell them, hey, we give them community service here, or we pay a fine, or you kick them out your country permanently, but we need our home basketball player. So Reverend Jackson can say today, once again, and if America don't listen, Jonathan better run for president this time so that he won't miss the Stalin and Trump gets in.
Bless your heart, Anita. We love you, Anita, down there in North Carolina. Robert Patillo, where do you see us at this time? I know you're going to be talking on your radio show on WAOK this afternoon. Of course, everyone, I encourage you to go to WAOK, iconic Atlanta talk radio station, but of course it can be heard all over the world. He'll be on from 1 to 4 Eastern Standard Time. Can you give me, of course we should be looking at Ukraine, we should be looking at Yemen, we should be looking at all of these conflicts all over the world in which people are displaced and treated unjustly. That having been said, do you think, is there any space in the conversation for voting rights right now, Robert Patillo?
Well, I think we have to force there to be space in for voting rights. I don't think there's lost on most Americans, particularly African Americans, that for the past first year of the Biden administration, all we heard about was, well, we can't do something because of Joe Manchin. We can't do something because of Christian Cinema. We can't do something because of Mitch McConnell. All these reasons that we haven't had voting rights. We haven't had criminal justice reform. We haven't had any of the things that were promised in 2020. But when it was time to pass that $1.5 trillion budget, $755 billion for the military, $20 billion for the Ukraine, they dropped the bill on a Wednesday. They passed it, signed into law on Friday. So it sounds like y'all can get done what you want to get done, what you prioritize, what you can. And also that where there are consequences, all of a sudden we can get bipartisan agreement because there are consequences, such as the government shutting down, such as the debt ceiling being not being extended. So for those of us who care about the right to vote, care about civil rights and the democracy that we believe in, we have to ensure that we're putting the same pressure on the government to act on our behalf as corporations, as the military industrial complex, as these other groups are, to make sure that things happen on their behalf. Somehow you got Manchin, McConnell, and everybody else to agree to send that $20 billion to Ukraine. God bless them. I hope nothing but the best comes out of it. But let's make sure we have that same sort of agency when it comes to ensuring the right to vote here in America. And for those who active in pushing forward these types of advances in our democracy, we have to make sure that we put consequences in place and people refuse to act on our behalf.
What say you, Reverend Dr. Yeary? Because we are meeting in New York, because you're saying that the business of business is ongoing, even with all as these conflicts abound, as inflation rages, and on and on and on. You said people are still going to play sport throughout the year. There are businesses affiliated with each franchise in each town and city all across America and indeed around the world, and that we need our piece of the pie. I mean, is there enough room to have all of these discussions at once, Reverend Dr. Yeary?
There's a necessity. So to Robert Patillo's point, we have to make room. We tend to accommodate what is important to us. And case in point, right? Because members of the upper chamber lost an hour of sleep last week when the clocks changed. The first thing they did when they got back is they passed a piece of legislation on a voice vote to make daylight savings time permanent with great efficiency, no argument. It just ends up being a vote. It's now going over to the House. If there are demonstrations that on a whim, the government can operate with great effectiveness and efficiency on things that are really not that critically important to folks, then why can we not get that same body to operate with great dispatch around the issues that affect all of us? And one of the reasons we have these issues is because when we look at the marketplace, a lot of what happens in the marketplace is controlled by what happens in the polling place. And at its core, the Constitution is not a justice document, it's an economic contract. It creates this system of engagement and entitlement that allows certain folks who have certain claims to enjoy certain benefits that go to the bottom line, to protect ourselves and our posterity. These notions of liberty and freedom had an economic underpinning. And so when we look at coming to Wall Street is not just about what happens where they're trading in stocks and bonds, but how the principles of Wall Street affect everything that happens on Main Street. And if we don't make sure that we keep those things linked, as Reverend Jackson has insisted upon for 25 years, at least in terms of a formal convening, many more years before that, what we will continue to find is that this erosion, there's something else much more sinister than making it kind of difficult to vote. It is that there is an interest tied to the outcome of making it more difficult to vote that accrues to certain people in elite spaces that allow them to suppress and oppress the rest of us for their economic advantagement and the economic advantage rather, and the bottom line. That's why we got to come to New York, but we got to leave New York and go to main streets across the country to make sure that the economic empowerment, voter engagement, civic conversation is a singular conversation, and we got to force folks to make room for it. We're not asking them to sit down at the table. We're going to come bring a chair, and we're going to dare you to tell us we can't sit.
Reverend Dr. Todd Geary, everybody, Esquire, Vice President of Rainbow Push. Please go to rainbowpush.org. Get registered for this Rainbow Push Wall Street Conference. There's something in it for you. There's something in it for you. There might be a business there that you didn't even think about. There are businesses that you need to have access to, and you need to have access to your vote. So in the midst of all of this global tumult, we are going to push for the vote, because guess what? The elections are here. It's 2022 already. Midterms are here. Will you be able to vote? Or will we face what we faced in Kentucky in 2018 when Charles Booker was running? One polling place for 660,000 people. Yeah, it happened just like that. Unbelievable. Back with more. Closing thoughts on Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson.
We'll have closing thoughts from Reverend Jesse Jackson right here on Keep Hope Alive.
Feet come in all shapes. You got fat feet, skinny feet, flat feet, high arch feet, short feet, and even feet so long people could probably surf on them. Cowabunga, baby. But they virtually all have one thing in common.
Thank you, Jeremy. Ooh. Oh, well. Hello. Ooh. Hello. Ooh.
Yes.
Okay, I'm running around. I've got to catch a flight shortly. So I'm wrapping things up, but thank you all for being here. Ooh. Okay. Boy, I'll get myself together here. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gerald. Gerald
Yes.
Griggs, I'm going to reach out to you so that I can connect you to Reverend, okay?
Okay.
So we can get on top of that. It's on the column because it needs to be written immediately.
Did you just put your coat on?
Oh, yeah. Because I had a flight to catch.
Oh. I know you're not cold.
Well, now you know it is a little chilly in here for Santita.
I'm about to get you some vitamin A, B, C, D.
There's everyone here, we be sneezing too. We are very sensitive to the cold. You all are insensitive. How about that?
Oh, you're gonna have a hard time. Wait, are you going up north?
No. I'm gonna head south and then over to Midway. What's up?
Well, you're on the Shamrock Shuffle.
What is a Shamrock Shuffle? What is that?
The marathon. So Legislature driver's probably closed.
Okay. Am I gonna be able to get an Uber out of here?
That's a good question.
Are you serious right now?
If you look out that window right there, you see all the green.
He just came up with this Shamrock Shuffle. I mean, come on. Okay.
All right, so we got 40 seconds coming back. We'll have
30 seconds apiece for everybody.
Yep.
Okay. Gentlemen, Daryl, Todd, Robert, Gerald, Frank.
Yes.
We're going to have 30 seconds
Yes,
apiece.
ma'am.
I'm going to start with you, Frank. And I will be done shuffling around here. Oh, man, this is all closed
coming up
off
at
right
15. You see all that green up there? Yep.
Ridiculous. They just came up with this shamrock
10.
shuffle.
We want to hear from you. Please email your questions
And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Keep Hope Alive. Thank you for being with us today. We want to get some closing thoughts on voting rights. Frank Watkins, 30 seconds. Your closing thoughts.
I want to tie Reverend Urie's tying of the political order to the economic order. You have the vote, which leads to politics, which leads to elected government officials or politicians. Why are politicians and politics important? Because politics is the distribution system for the economic system. It mostly determines who gets what, where, when, why, how much, for how long, and what it's called. A child tax credit, a tax cut, or welfare.
Attorney Daryl Jones, your closing thought.
Thank you, Santita. You know, when we were in Georgia leading people to the polls, in one particular area in Georgia, we had dogs and police called on us to try to intimidate us, to stop us from bringing people to the polls. It's important right now that everyone exercise that right to vote, that you encourage people to get out and vote. It's important that, you know, we recognize that it's the state legislatures that will be controlling those types of voter intimidation, that type of voter suppression legislation that's in place. We need people to get out and be certain, particularly during this election cycle, that they get out and vote and exercise that franchise.
Attorney Robert Patillo, you'll be on the air on WAOK from 1 to 4 Eastern Standard Time this afternoon. Closing thoughts.
The government is going to do what you force them to do. If you want them to prioritize voting rights, if you want them to prioritize criminal justice reform, you have to apply that pressure. Do not simply sit back and take no for an answer. When they want to pass things, let's not let them make excuses even before action.
Attorney Gerald Griggs.
Been a long, hot summer with a lot of protests and a lot of organizing. Sine Die is April the 4th. We've been outside for another 15 days. We'll continue to protect the rights of Georgians, and we will make sure an executive order gets signed on our voting rights to make good on the promises that were made on the election trail.
Reverend Dr. Todd Urey, I will see you in New York shortly. The last 30 seconds belong to you.
It's real simple, Santita. I'll see you tonight. When they sing the song New York, New York, it means something different. The reason we're going to Wall Street is because it affects what happens on Main Street. And always remember this, if they can take it there, they'll take it anywhere. So let's keep an eye on what's happening right outside our doors and make sure we protect the right to vote, which protects our economic interests, which makes sure we have posterity and future for our generations to come and not just the elite.
Everybody, and always remember, I hope to hear you all, hope to get with you on the Santita Jackson Show, WCPT 820 and AM 950 radio. And remember, throughout the week, keep hope alive. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson. For more information on upcoming shows and guests, please visit our website at www.keephopealiveradio.com.
Love you all.